It was a chilly November evening when I hosted a family dinner at our home in Raleigh, North Carolina. I'm Lorraine Thompson, 38, and I'd just landed a big promotion at my finance firm. The table was set, the aroma of roasted turkey filled the air, and I was ready to share my news, hoping for a moment of family pride. My brother stood up, glass in hand, and declared, "Mom and Dad said you never contribute anything to this family." The room erupted in applause. My parents, my aunt, even cousins clapped like it was a performance. I froze, my smile tight, feeling the sting of their words. Then something snapped. I stood, looked him dead in the eye, and said, "Perfect." Then the $6,000 I've been paying for their mortgage every month stops today. My dad choked on his wine, coughing hard. My mom's face turned pale, her fork clattering to the plate. The room went silent, all eyes on me. I didn't explain. I didn't need to. The truth was out, and the air felt electric. What happened next flipped my family upside down, and I'm still reeling from it. Want to know how it all unraveled? Stick around, because this is just the start. Before we dive deeper, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below. Have you ever been blindsided by family like this? I'd love to hear your stories. Weeks before that dinner, I was elbow deep in planning, hoping for a night to remember. I'd spent days scouring grocery stores in Raleigh, picking out the freshest turkey, sweet potatoes, and cranberries for a proper family feast. My husband helped me lug bags from the car, teasing me about buying enough to feed an army. I wanted everything perfect: candles on the table, a playlist of soft jazz, and a new tablecloth to make our dining room feel special. I sent out invites to my parents, my brother, my aunt, and a few cousins, picturing their smiles when I shared my big news. At 38, I'd just been promoted to senior manager at my finance firm, a title I'd worked years to earn. The thought of my family raising their glasses to toast my success made my chest swell with pride. I couldn't stop thinking about what this moment could mean. Growing up, I'd always been the one pushing harder, staying up late to study while my brother slacked off. I remembered nights in my cramped apartment, poring over financial textbooks, chasing certifications to climb the corporate ladder. My husband stayed by my side, brewing coffee at midnight, cheering me on through every exam. Those sacrifices paid off. My new office had a view of downtown Raleigh, and my paycheck could finally ease some family burdens. I wanted to do more for my parents, maybe help them fix their creaky porch or cover unexpected bills. If they saw how far I'd come, maybe they'd finally say they were proud. The day of the dinner arrived, and I was buzzing with excitement. I spent the morning chopping vegetables, my son helping with the stuffing while my husband set up chairs. I imagined my dad clapping me on the back, my mom beaming, even my brother nodding with respect. But as guests trickled in, something felt off. My brother arrived late, barely saying hello, his eyes fixed on his phone. My parents shuffled in, their faces tight, offering quick hugs before sitting silently at the table. My aunt chatted about the weather, but her smile seemed forced. The jazz played softly, the turkey smelled divine, yet the air carried a chill I couldn't place. My son caught my eye, raising an eyebrow as if he sensed it too. I brushed it off, telling myself it was just nerves. I wanted this night to bring us closer, to show them who I'd become. I had no idea how wrong I was about what was coming. I spent hours perfecting the menu, choosing dishes I knew my family loved: green bean casserole for my mom, pecan pie for my dad. I even bought a bottle of wine my brother once mentioned liking, hoping it might spark a real conversation. My husband and I had saved for weeks to afford the spread-cutting corners on our own groceries to make this night special. I kept picturing their reactions when I announced my promotion, the way their eyes might light up. I'd worked so hard, not just for me, but for them too. I wanted to be the daughter who made things easier, who gave them something to brag about at church or the community center. Looking back, I should have noticed the signs earlier. My brother's calls had grown shorter over the years, always rushed, never asking about my life. My parents rarely mentioned my job, brushing off my updates with vague comments about their own struggles. I thought this dinner could change that, bridge the gap I felt growing between us. I remembered a moment from years ago when I got my first big bonus and offered to help with their bills. They'd thanked me, but it was quick, almost dismissive, like it was expected. I pushed the memory aside, focusing on the present. The table was set, the candles flickered, and I took a deep breath, ready to share my news. My son squeezed my hand under the table, his quiet support grounding me. I was ready for a night that would make us feel like a family again. As the pumpkin pie hit the table, the room felt heavier than I expected. The dining room in our Raleigh home glowed under soft chandelier light, the table laden with roasted turkey, mashed potatoes, and green bean casserole. The spread was a feast, every dish steaming and fragrant, but the faces around me didn't match the warmth. My brother Matthew sat across from me, his jaw tight, barely touching his plate. My dad Ralph fiddled with his wineglass, avoiding my gaze. My mom Pamela picked at her food, her lips pressed thin. My Aunt Ellen made small talk about the weather, but her voice was strained. Only my husband Robert and my son Benjamin seemed at ease, Robert offering me a reassuring smile, while Benjamin piled stuffing onto his plate. The jazz playlist I'd chosen played faintly, but it couldn't mask the tension creeping into the air. I took a deep breath, ready to share my promotion. I'd worked years for this, and I wanted them to know. Before I could speak, Matthew pushed his chair back and stood, his glass raised like he was about to give a toast. His eyes locked on mine, cold and sharp. "Mom and Dad said you never contribute anything to this family," he declared, his voice cutting through the room. The words hit like a slap. My cousins clapped. My aunt joined in, even my parents nodded along, their faces smug. The applause echoed, each clap a jab at my heart. I felt my pulse race, my hands trembling under the table. Benjamin looked at me, his fork frozen midair, his eyes wide with confusion. Robert reached for my hand, his grip steady, but I barely felt it. The room seemed to spin, their betrayal sinking in. I stood my chair, scraping the floor, and forced a smile. "Perfect," I said, my voice calm but sharp. "Then the $6,000 I've been paying for their mortgage every month stops today." Ralph choked on his wine, coughing violently, his face red. Pamela's fork clattered to her plate, her face draining to a ghostly pale. The applause stopped, replaced by stunned silence. My cousins exchanged glances, their hands frozen. Ellen's mouth opened, but no words came out. Matthew's smug grin faltered, his eyes narrowing. I didn't flinch. I'd held this secret too long, and their accusation had snapped something inside me. For 5 years, I continued, my voice steady. "Now I've paid $6,000 every month for Ralph and Pamela's mortgage. That's $72,000 a year, over $360,000 total. I've also covered their health insurance premiums, $400 a month, because they couldn't afford it after Dad retired. And let's not forget the $2,000 for their roof repair last spring, or the plumbing fix the year before that." I looked at Ralph, who was still coughing, his napkin pressed to his mouth. Pamela stared at her plate, her hands shaking. Matthew sat down hard, his face a mix of shock and defiance. The room was so quiet I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. "This stops now," I said, my eyes sweeping the table. "No more payments, no more covering for anyone. You think I don't contribute? Fine, you're on your own." Robert nodded, his hand still on mine, his expression fierce with support. Benjamin watched me, his eyes bright with something like pride. Ellen stammered, "Lorraine, maybe we can talk this out," her voice weak, her hands twisting her napkin. I shook my head. "There's nothing to talk about," I said. "You made your stance clear." Matthew leaned forward, his voice low. "You're really going to do this?" "Over one comment?" I met his gaze, unflinching. "It's not one comment. It's years of being invisible to you all." The rest of the meal passed in near silence. Pamela pushed her food around, not eating. Ralph sipped his wine, his cough subsiding, but his face still flushed. My cousins avoided my eyes, their earlier enthusiasm gone. Ellen tried to change the subject, mentioning a neighbor's new car, but no one responded. Robert kept his hand on mine, a quiet anchor. Benjamin ate slowly, glancing at me every few bites as if checking I was okay. I felt a strange calm, like a weight had lifted. I'd spent years carrying their burdens, thinking it would earn their respect. But that night I saw the truth. They didn't see me, not really. And I was done trying to prove myself to them. 3 days after the dinner, my phone buzzed with Pamela's voicemail. I was in my home office sorting through emails when the notification popped up. Her voice came through shaky but sharp, pleading for me to call her back. "Lorraine, you're being too harsh," she said, her tone a mix of guilt and accusation. "We need to talk about the house payments. You can't just pull the rug out from under us like this." I listened, my jaw tight, as she went on about how tough things had been since Ralph retired. She didn't mention the years I'd covered their bills, not a word of thanks, just a demand to keep the money flowing. I deleted the message without replying, my fingers hovering over the phone. I'd spent too long carrying their weight, and her words only hardened my resolve. That afternoon, I logged into my bank account and canceled the automatic payments for Ralph and Pamela's mortgage. It was a simple click, $6,000 a month gone. I also stopped the $400 health insurance transfers I'd been making for them. The screen confirmed the changes, and I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. For 5 years, I'd kept their lives afloat, thinking it was my duty as their daughter. Now I was done. Robert walked in, saw the screen, and nodded. "You did the right thing," he said, his voice firm. Benjamin was at school, but I knew he'd understand. My family, my real family, was here in this house, not begging for handouts while judging me. By evening, my phone lit up again, this time with texts from cousins I hadn't spoken to in months. "Heard you're abandoning your parents," one read. Another said, "How could you be so selfish?" My stomach churned as I realized Ralph and Pamela had started a whisper campaign. They'd called my uncle in Charlotte, my aunt's bridge club, even our old neighbors, spinning a tale that I'd turned my back on family. They painted me as cold, ungrateful, a daughter who'd rather let her parents lose their home than lift a finger. Not one mentioned the hundreds of thousands I'd paid to keep that home theirs. I scrolled through the messages, each one a fresh cut, but I didn't respond. I wouldn't play their game. Then came Matthew's text late that night. "You're destroying this family," it read. "Mom and Dad are freaking out because of you. Fix this, Lorraine." I stared at the words, my heart pounding. He'd stood there at the dinner leading the charge against me, and now he had the nerve to blame me for their panic. I wanted to fire back, to list every dollar I'd spent, every sacrifice I'd made, but I stopped myself. Replying would only drag me into their chaos. Instead, I turned off my phone and went to bed. Robert's arm around me, his steady breathing a reminder that I wasn't alone. The next morning, I focused on what mattered. I drove Benjamin to school, laughing as he told me about his history project. Robert and I planned a weekend hike, something we hadn't done in months. I pushed the family drama to the back of my mind, determined not to let it consume me. But the rumors kept coming. A coworker whose sister knew my aunt asked if I was okay, saying she'd heard I'd cut off my parents. I forced a smile, said it was complicated, and changed the subject. Ralph and Pamela's story was spreading like wildfire, each version more distorted than the last. They'd told relatives I was hoarding my wealth, that I'd always been distant, that I cared more about my career than family. It stung, but I refused to engage. I kept my routine steady, anchoring myself in the life I'd built. Benjamin came home with a good grade on a math test, and we celebrated with pizza. Robert and I stayed up late talking about our next steps, maybe even a vacation. But Pamela's voicemail lingered in my mind, her voice echoing with entitlement. I checked my bank account again, confirming the payments were stopped. The finality of it felt right, but heavy. I'd carried their burdens for so long, it was strange to let go. Yet every time I thought of calling back, I remembered their silence at the dinner, their nods when Matthew accused me. They'd made their choice, and I'd made mine. A week later, Matthew walked into Robert's office without warning. Robert was at his desk, a small accounting firm in downtown Raleigh, papers scattered around him. Matthew didn't knock, just strode in his face, set with a mix of anger and desperation. "You need to talk to Lorraine," he said, leaning over the desk, his voice low but intense. "She's tearing this family apart by cutting off Mom and Dad. It's not right, Robert. You know it." Robert leaned back, his expression calm but firm. He'd seen this coming, especially after the texts and rumors swirling around. Matthew went on painting me as the villain, saying I'd left our parents in a financial mess without a second thought. He didn't mention the years I'd paid their bills, just focused on how my decision was ruining everything. Robert didn't waver. "Lorraine's done more than enough," he said, his tone steady. "You don't get to walk in here and demand she fix your mess. You need to leave Matthew." Matthew's face reddened, his hands clenching into fists. He opened his mouth as if to argue, but Robert stood pointing to the door. "Now," he said, his voice leaving no room for debate. Matthew hesitated, then turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Robert called me right after, recounting every word. I listened, my stomach twisting. Matthew's nerve to go behind my back to try pulling Robert against me felt like another betrayal, piling onto the hurt from that dinner. That evening, my phone rang again. It was Ellen, my aunt, her voice hesitant but urgent. "Lorraine, I need to tell you something," she said, pausing as if weighing her words. "Matthew knew about the money you were giving Ralph and Pamela. He's known for years." I froze, gripping the phone tighter. Ellen went on, explaining how Matthew had bragged to her last year about not having to help our parents because I was covering everything. "He said it was easier that way," she added, her tone heavy with guilt. "He didn't want to pitch in, so he kept quiet. Let you carry the load." I felt a wave of shock, then anger burning hot in my chest. Matthew hadn't just accused me at the dinner. He'd hidden the truth to dodge responsibility, letting me bear the burden alone while he played the dutiful son. I thanked Ellen, my voice tight, and hung up. The revelation hit hard. I'd spent years thinking I was helping my family, believing Matthew was just clueless, not calculating. Knowing he'd deliberately stayed silent, letting me drain my savings while he contributed nothing, made my blood boil. It wasn't just about the money, it was the lie, the pretense that I was the one failing them. I sat on the couch, staring at the wall, my mind racing. Robert came over, sitting beside me, his hand on my shoulder. "You don't owe him anything," he said softly. "Not after this." I nodded, the weight of Ellen's words settling in. That was it. I was done with Matthew. No more calls, no more texts, no more chances. Later that night, Benjamin knocked on my bedroom door. He stood there, his lanky frame filling the doorway, his eyes searching mine. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked, his voice quiet but concerned. He'd overheard me talking to Robert, caught the edge in my tone. I forced a smile, patting the bed for him to sit. "I'm fine, Ben," I said, ruffling his hair like I did when he was younger. "Just figuring out who really matters in this family." He frowned, not fully understanding but sensing the hurt. I told him a simplified version, that some people take more than they give, and sometimes you have to let them go. He nodded, leaning against me, and for a moment I felt grounded. Benjamin's quiet support, Robert's unwavering loyalty. These were my family now, not the ones who'd turned their backs. I blocked Matthew's number that night. It was a small act, but it felt final, like closing a door I'd left open too long. I didn't need his apologies or excuses. Ellen's call had shown me who he really was, and I wasn't going to let him drag me back into their drama. I lay awake thinking about the years I'd spent trying to keep everyone happy, only to be blindsided by their resentment. But with Robert and Benjamin by my side, I felt a clarity I hadn't had before. Matthew could keep his secrets, his accusations, his guilt trips. I was moving forward, and he wasn't coming with me. 2 days later, my phone lit up with Pamela's text. I was in the kitchen chopping vegetables for dinner when the message popped up. "Lorraine, I'm sorry if we upset you." It read, the words dripping with insincerity. But you need to reconsider stopping the payments. We're struggling. Please call me. No acknowledgement of the years I'd paid their mortgage, no gratitude, just another plea for money. I stared at the screen, my knife still in hand, feeling a familiar anger bubble up. Pamela's words weren't an apology, they were a demand dressed up as regret. I set the phone down, not replying, and went back to cooking. I'd already made my decision, and her text only confirmed I was right. The next day, Ellen called me while I was at work, her voice low and uneasy. "Lorraine, there's something else you should know," she said, hesitating. "Ralph and Pamela have been talking about you online. They posted on X saying you're letting Robert control your finances, that he's the reason you cut them off." My heart sank as Ellen described the post's vague but pointed, painting me as a puppet in my own marriage, abandoning my parents for my husband's greed. They'd even hinted I was hoarding wealth, leaving them destitute. The betrayal stung deeper than the dinner accusations. Not only had they dismissed my sacrifices, but now they were dragging Robert's name through the mud on a public platform for all our relatives to see. I called Ellen back that evening, my voice steady but cold. 5 years, Ellen, I said, pacing my living room. 5 years I paid their mortgage, their insurance, their repairs, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and not once did they say thank you. Not once. Ellen tried to interrupt, her tone soft, saying she understood, but I wasn't done. And now they're on X lying about Robert, about me. They don't get to rewrite the story to make themselves victims. Ellen sighed, admitting she'd tried to talk them out of it, but they wouldn't listen. I thanked her for telling me, but my mind was racing. This wasn't just gossip anymore. It was a deliberate attack, and I was done letting it slide. That night, I made a decision. I blocked Pamela and Ralph's numbers just as I'd done with Matthew's. No more texts, no more calls, no more chances for them to guilt me. I'd spent too long hoping for their approval, believing family meant carrying their burdens without question. But their lies on social media, their refusal to acknowledge my efforts, showed me who they really were. Cutting contact wasn't easy. There was a pang of guilt, a flicker of doubt. But it felt necessary, like shedding a weight I'd carried too long. Robert sat with me as I did it, his hand on my back. His quiet support steady as ever. Benjamin was upstairs, unaware, but I knew he'd understand when I explained later. The next morning, I called my lawyer, a woman I'd worked with on a few contracts at my firm. I explained the situation, not just the stopped payments, but the rumors, the social media posts, the years of unappreciated support. "I need to protect my family," I told her, my voice firm. "I don't want them coming after us for money or dragging our names any further." She was calm, professional, outlining steps to secure our finances. We set up a trust for Benjamin's college fund, ensuring it was untouchable. She also drafted a letter to Ralph and Pamela, formal but clear, stating I'd no longer engage with their demands. It wasn't a threat, just a boundary, one I should have set years ago. I felt a strange peace after that. The lawyer's call, the blocked numbers, the clarity of my choice. It all settled something in me. Pamela's text had been the final straw, a reminder that some people will take everything and still demand more. Ellen's warning about their online posts only made it clearer. I didn't need their approval or their presence in my life. My family was Robert, Benjamin, and the home we'd built together. I looked at the photos on our fridge, Benjamin's school play, Robert and me on a hiking trail, and knew I'd made the right call. They could keep their stories, their posts, their blame. I was free. A month later, the silence from my family was louder than ever. Through a distant cousin, I heard that Ralph and Pamela had lost their house. The bank foreclosed when they couldn't keep up with the mortgage payments I'd once covered. They'd packed up their belongings and moved to a small apartment across town, a place they could barely afford on Ralph's pension. I didn't feel triumph, just a quiet ache. I'd spent years keeping that house theirs, pouring my savings into their stability, only for them to throw it back in my face. The news settled like a stone in my chest, heavy, but final, a reminder that my choice to walk away had been right. Matthew, far I learned, had taken a job at a retail store scanning items at a checkout counter somewhere in Raleigh. He hadn't reached out since storming out of Robert's office, and I hadn't expected him to. The cousin who mentioned it said he seemed worn down, juggling long shifts to make ends meet. Part of me wondered if he'd ever reflect on his role in our family's fracture, but I didn't dwell on it. Matthew had made his choices hiding what he knew about my support, accusing me to save face, and I'd made mine. His silence was his own burden now, not mine. I'd blocked his number and I had no plans to unblock it. At home, life with Robert and Benjamin felt like a new chapter. We'd grown closer, carving out time for small moments that mattered. We spent weekends cooking together, Benjamin mastering his pancake flips, while Robert and I laughed over his messy attempts. One evening, Benjamin asked about the family, his voice careful. "Why don't we see Grandpa and Grandma anymore?" he said, stirring hot chocolate at the kitchen counter. I took a breath, choosing my words. "Sometimes people take more than they give," I told him. "Setting boundaries means protecting ourselves even from family." He nodded, his face thoughtful, and I saw something click in him, a lesson about self-respect I wished I'd learned sooner. Benjamin was growing up, and I wanted him to know his worth didn't depend on others' approval. I found an old box of receipts in my office buried under files from years ago. They were records of the mortgage payments I'd made for Ralph and Pamela, $6,000 a month every month for 5 years. I flipped through them, the faded ink, a stark reminder of the weight I'd carried. Each receipt was a piece of evidence, not just of the money, but of the manipulation I'd endured, their silence, their accusations, their refusal to acknowledge what I'd done. I didn't keep them out of bitterness. They were a lesson, a way to remind myself never to let guilt pull me back into their chaos. I tucked the box away in a drawer, not to dwell on, but to glance at when doubt crept in. Looking back, I saw the truth I'd missed for so long. Family isn't just blood. It's the people who see you, who value you, who don't demand your sacrifice without gratitude. Ralph, Pamela, and Matthew had taken my support for granted, twisting it into a story where I was the villain. But setting boundaries wasn't about punishment. It was about protecting myself from their ingratitude and manipulation. I'd spent years trying to prove my worth to them, only to realize they'd never see it. Robert and Benjamin were my family now, and their love was enough. I'd learned to say no, to walk away, and to build a life where I wasn't defined by others' expectations. That was my strength, and I'd carry it forward no matter what came next.